We're talking college football playoff rankings. We're talking college football. This is going to be an episode where I'm going to give you what I think, based on what I see, and not as much bias as most people think, but something to get the conversation started, to see what other people's opinions are. I think that's what college football is all about. I think we've got teams that I may think are questionable, and then someone may, someone else, and may like, hey, they get in, or I may say, hey, if Indiana wins by a little bit, they still get in, and some people say they gotta win that game entirely. So I have a few questions. SMU is getting some hate, and I'm not sure why. They're top of the ACC. They play good ball. They seem like they could win out the rest of their games. Their one loss is versus a BYU team, which at the time it was an 18-15 game, so it wasn't anything crazy. But SMU, why is Miami always in the 4 seed? They lost to Georgia Tech. I know Georgia Tech beat FSU, but FSU's 1-9. Do we really focus hard on like the heavy hitters that are going to give us the best games? Because SMU on paper, they Virginia and Cal. They will run it and play if they went out, the potential to win the ACC, winning those very, very doable games. They've got Cal at home, so they don't got to travel, and they go to Virginia. So kind of look at SMU, and then the Clemson, Miami, where that might fall into range. Notre Dame, Indiana, Penn State, I have question marks. I don't think that they're bad. I don't think we should punish a team for doing what they do. Indiana's best wins against a 5-5 Michigan. If they lose to Ohio State by 2 touchdowns or more, which is the spread's 13.5, I believe. Now what? Does Indiana win the game? Now what? What happens to Ohio State if Indiana wins? Does Indiana lose by 3? What happens? Look back like 2 years ago, Georgia had the same kind of statistics as Indiana did. Don't quote me on what year. The year is evading me, but I think about 2 seasons ago, Georgia had like 106 strength of schedule of that type of nature. Their best wins were Kentucky and Florida, and they were ranked 2. And their point differential is like 28. Indiana's point differential is 32. Their best win is against Michigan, and their strength of schedule, what have you, is like 101. And they're ranked 8th. So kind of go from there. Are you looking at an undefeated rank as like, okay, we'll do it? Or are you looking at, they didn't play anybody undefeated rank? Like, what does that kind of fall into? Penn State, again, same type of thing as Indiana, but Penn State couldn't beat Ohio State. Now, if Indiana does beat Ohio State, Indiana will separate themselves from Penn State. But Penn State's got the same type of scenario. I'm not sure what their strength of schedule is not very good based on what they've played. So I'm kind of thinking like what to expect from them. And when they potentially get in, is it going to be a competitive game? Penn State has the potential to host a game. The last ranking I saw, I believe Georgia would play. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Penn State would host a game, so that's kind of insane. I'm kind of looking at it like that. What's going to happen in the SEC is a lot of good questions. Will the third lost SEC team get in? I think so, depending on who it is. I think they're going to give the nod to Georgia for whatever reason. I know Carson Beck has been up in the air. I do think the SEC is really sold on Georgia in regards to whatever they do. So if Georgia was that team to get a third loss, I think of all the SEC teams, other than Ole Miss, and Ole Miss beat Georgia. So if Ole Miss can, keep that, hey, we beat, because they're always going to have the we beat Georgia. Can they keep their football level where it is now, and Georgia kind of just, not what to expect? Because let's be honest, Carson Beck, you don't know if you're going to get A or Z, and you really don't know. But if Ole Miss, I would say Ole Miss would be just as important to get in as Georgia. I don't think Tennessee is going to get out. I think they've done enough. I said last week they had the opportunity to play their way into the SEC championship game and have an opportunity. They did not answer the bell. In my frankly opinion, they don't deserve to. I know they went to Georgia. Wasn't a competitive game based on the score, so I'm really not sold on Georgia. Alabama's 8-2. They really haven't moved since that second loss. They've kind of been 5-8 ratio. They've actually jumped 3 spots, so they went from 10 to 7. So they're really sold on Alabama. SEC is a juggernaut. So, you have these teams who, in the SEC, you got Texas beats, you got Bama beats Georgia, but loses to Vandy and loses to Tennessee. Tennessee almost loses to Florida and doesn't beat Georgia. Ole Miss beats Georgia. Georgia hammers Texas. Texas wins against. They've had a big win and they have a big loss. So you have the SEC is just such a strong. These three teams are playing out. Texas A&M and Texas are playing. Last game of the year, that game is going to determine a lot because if Texas A&M wins out, they're in. And I think if I'm Texas A&M, I'm feeling okay. So you have the SEC just as a whole is just such a juggernaut, and I'm not really sure what to think about it. Just because these one-loss games, like Georgia really hammered Texas. Georgia really got beat by Ole Miss. Georgia also really got beat by Bama. So we not really know what to expect. Texas A&M getting in helps their chance to get in the playoff. I don't think that's going to give them. Actually, it would guarantee them a spot in the playoff because they would get a bye. Do I see Texas A&M win the SEC? No. I think Texas is going to play Georgia again for the rematch. I think that's how that's going to play out. I think Texas A&M has had their opportunity in the spotlight, and they haven't played fair enough well to see to anticipate them doing really well, if that makes sense. They've had big games. They really haven't answered the bell, and it's in College Station, which gives them, again, no excuse to not really, really, really bring the energy. But I think Texas gets in and plays Georgia again. Boise State out of the Mountain West. They lost to number 1 Oregon, I think, on the road by like 7. Pretty much should have won that game. I mean, Oregon had games that year that they shouldn't have. Oregon has had games this year that they shouldn't have won, but needless to say, they won those games. They shouldn't have beat Wisconsin. They shouldn't have beat Boise State. They got a team. They got a game-winning field against another team. Forgive me, like 3 weeks ago. But Oregon's number 1. But Boise State, I think Boise State's not getting enough love, and I think they are going to win the Mountain West. The only thing that comes into play is undefeated Army. Do you put undefeated Army in or one-loss Boise to number 1? But what's going on now, if Boise stays where they are, they're going to get a bye. They're going to have a better resume than whatever Big 12 team wins the Big 12. So you'll have Boise State with the Mount West championship trump the Big 12, and the Big 12 will be the 5th. And I'm really, 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 really... really, really, really looking forward to Boise State gets in, gets a bye, and gets the 4 seed. Does Army get in as undefeated? I think it would be fantastic to put Army in. I think Army being 12-0 and being 12-0 and getting that 12 seed over a 1-loss Big 12, 2 or 3 loss SEC. I think you have to look at resumes. You've kept Indiana this low this high in the rankings, so you really got to think about that type of energy. So we've got some question marks. It's really coming down to the SEC is plugged in. You have Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, and Bama. They're in there. They're like 4 out of the last 6 spots, and you have SMU looking out. So depending on what goes on in the SEC, it looks like based on previous rankings that they're going to hammer the SEC with playoff teams, which is, I mean, bias is one thing, but do they deserve it is another question. I mean, how many losses in the SEC can you get to? You're like, okay, where do we draw the line? Is it 2 or is it 3? I mean, 2 losses, we weren't saying you were getting in the playoffs. Now 2 can keep you alive, and even 3 can keep you alive. I'm thinking right now, based on the rankings, the playoff committee is not high on SMU and Army. They're really loving Boise, and I think Boise's going to have a walkthrough. So it's really interesting to see what's going to happen in regards to those 4 out of 6 spots that are left that are currently in an SEC team. Now, mind you, Ole Miss and Georgia and Tennessee aren't playing each other anywhere near, and Alabama's kind of in its own area. So, you don't really have any more matchups that can determine what order they fall into. Texas beats Texas A&M. That kind of really doesn't do anything for the rankings. So it potentially could be those 4 teams get in, and one of a team like SMU gets put out. I'm kind of thinking what they're gonna look at the committee wise. I think Miami is getting really, really overplayed. I know they're not in. They're in 3 right now. I'm wondering why they're looking over SMU. SMU wins out, they're in against potentially Miami. I'm pretty sure Miami and Clemson don't play, so it'll be Miami, I do believe. I don't quote me on this. I'm not sure if Clemson or Miami has that. Let me know in the comments, but I'm whether or not who goes first. But it looks like SMU plays Miami, and Miami's already in that 3 spot, and SMU's out looking in. So it looks like SMU's gonna have to run it. Obviously, they run it, they're gonna get a bye. But if I don't know if they get in and lose, I don't know. Do they still stay in? Because it seems like the SEC is like not moving spots, and those teams really won't move spots. So got a lot to digest. Let me know what you think in the comments. Kind of just a little breathalyzer of college football update. Got some big games: Indiana, Ohio State. Got some games in the end of the year. So nothing is set. Oregon is guaranteed at least a spot in the Big Ten title game. That is for sure. Texas A&M wins out there in the SEC. If Texas beats Texas A&M a week from Saturday, then it is Texas-Georgia rematch. Ohio State wins out therein. ACC, I'm pretty sure is going to be Miami and SMU. I'm looking at the standings right now. No, actually, right now it's Clemson with a 7-1 conference record. And SMU, so and Miami doesn't have anybody to finish the year. They have Wake Forest and Syracuse. Clemson has Seidel and South Carolina. So Clemson's not going to move, and it doesn't seem like Clemson's going to have a shot to get into the ACC championship game. It's going to be SMU, Miami, those 2 teams. Clemson has a chance, but they need a lot to happen because their last 2 games aren't in ACC play, so they're going to finish 7-1. Miami and SMU finish out, so SMU wins 1 more, they get in. So that's really what we're looking at. Thanks for tuning in. That's a little bit of Playview, Playoff. Let me know in the comments what you think. I've talked a lot about stuff. I think it's about just under 10-minute video. Talk about everything. If you watch this all the way through, there's a great conversation starter. So let me know what you think, and we'll tune in from there. Appreciate y'all.